I can't see anything.
Okay. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good
Morning.
morning. Sorry about a few technical difficulties this morning, but hopefully we're all good to go. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We might make a start. We have Jody from the department this morning who's going to do our presentation. So thank you, Jody, for agreeing to do this for everybody. We are recording the session, so it will be available for everybody to go back and revisit as many times as you need to.
Oh, good.
With questions for Jody, because we've got a fairly limited time and a fair amount of stuff to cover today, if we can put them in the chat, what we'll do is we'll answer the questions and put those as a document under the recording for everybody. So if everybody's happy with that, that would be great. All right, Jody, are you there?
Yes, hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Right. Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Thanks for coming along. And
Can't
thanks
see
to the CCAV for putting this together and asking us to participate. I guess, yeah, so in part, this is about what trusts are required to do in terms of setting their fees. It is a really high level overview. The idea of this will be that hopefully there's enough information in this that when trusts are going through their own fee justification models and working out the value of their land and that type of thing, that they're able to put together an application that's in reasonable shape before it gets submitted to the department to review. And if I'm not throwing the CCAV in it, I believe they're quite happy to help you look at drafts as well. I also encourage everybody when they are doing their fees, if you've got a trust nearby that you know has worked on fees and had their fee applications approved and they've been through something where we've gone through that fee justification model with them and explain things, by all means feel free to network with each other because that's quite valuable as well. So one of the main things in doing your fees and developing them is to ensure that they comply with the legislative requirements, and they are well, one of the main things is that your fees need to be gazetted, because unless they're approved by the department and gazetted, they're actually not fees at all. Well, they might be your fees, but they're not fees that are approved and published through the Victorian Government Gazette. And I will say that what happens with that is that only the Gazette notice says that your fees have been approved, and then it's what's available on our website that are the correct fees. Noting that there can be a lag of a couple of months sometimes, because once your fees are approved and on the back end part of our website, what happens is about every 2 months, those fees get updated through the department's internal web team. And they're quite busy. So as you can imagine, like we might get 3 or 4 fee applications in a week. If they're approved, the web team don't have the capability or capacity because it's for the whole entire department to update our back-end sites so that the most relevant fees are available, but people can always contact us and we can send them out. So once your fees are approved and gazetted, then they become the appropriate fees for your cemetery trust. In saying that as well, I want to say that trusts shouldn't charge for something that they don't have a fee for either, and you're not required to do anything for nothing. So if you don't have a fee, you can't provide that service technically, or you should not be providing that service. So that's a key thing to sort of think about in thinking about what type of fees you actually need as well, to ensure that you've covered those. So that might be, for instance, where cemetery trusts might have, say, for example, interment of bodily remains, but they don't have anything for an interment of cremated remains. And there's no fee structure for that. and very often trusts will just do those things. You're not expected to do that, and nor should you. You're not there to provide a free service to the community. You know, I know you're there to serve the community, but it's not for you to provide a free service. So I'd just like to point that out as well. So when you're setting your fees, you're required to look at your financial sustainability, and that's just not also for the current timeframes, it's also for future time. So that's also looking at things like perpetual maintenance and cost recovery. So what we expect trusts to be able to do is cost recover for any of the areas they're developed, and also align your fees with cost recovery, which we'll go through after, for yourselves. If you're a volunteer and you're spending your time travelling to and from the cemetery, and we'll go through this, as I said, in more detail later, you are expected to claim those costs back. If you're using your own fuel, you're using your mobile phone, you're using your own fuel for mowers and things like that, we do not expect you to be out of pocket for that. You are not required to be, and we do not expect it. Under the, I'm not sure if it's under the Act or it's just, and I should be aware of that, but I'm not, or it's just a policy setting. But I believe that the amount you can claim back is about $2,000. So, and that would stand to reason for general things like fuel and maintenance on your own car and wear and tear and that sort of thing. So please ensure that you look at things like perpetual maintenance and setting perpetual maintenance aside for the future, what it costs to actually run the cemetery, and also what it costs you when you are you know, you're providing your services as a volunteer. And certainly if you've got paid staff, ensuring that you've got cost recovery for those. And then we have things like the fee justification model tool and the land value calculator to help you with those. And for the purposes of this presentation, later on, we'll also go through a simplified version of the land calculation, land value calculator. And that is something you can basically do on the back of an envelope, that you can still submit to the department as your workings out as to how you've come to those figures. Narelle, could we have the next slide, please? Thanks.
Sure.
Thank you. So these are lists of common sort of expenses that you might want to think about when you're actually doing your or developing your fee justification model and working out what things are costing you. So in perpetual maintenance fees, you would be looking at things like the ground maintenance and repairs, your tools, equipment, water, electricity, gas, waste management, you know, replacing plants, that sort of thing. If you've got security systems available to you at the cemetery, yeah, chemicals for weed spray, all those sorts of things. They are the day-to-day things that cost you money. So purchasing your equipment as well, and replacement value. And there are ways of working those out. So for instance, and I'll just run through this very briefly. In terms of equipment, if you're replacing your ride-on mower every 5 years, well, then work out what it costs and divide that by 5 years, and then divide that by the number of plots available, and you'll get a guesstimate cost for what you should be adding to each plot, for or the cost and the value for your perpetual maintenance. And then your overall infrastructure goes into things that you would charge when you're doing your fees for the cost of an actual plot entirely. So what you would do is you would look at things like your infrastructure for your fences, and what it costs to develop all of the fences around the cemetery. And this can be done retrospectively too, when you're looking at adding in and developing new costs. So what it costs to build that fence again? What are the materials in it? How much would it have cost probably when it was done, when you look at the costs of fence posts and concrete and labour to do it? How much does it cost to put in the roadways and develop those, and pathways and things like that, and maintain those? Your lighting, your signage, if you've got irrigation, how often are you looking at repairing that and doing things with that, or what did it cost you to put those things in? Then your administration. So you might be lucky enough to have an office on site. So all of the costs that go into running that office on site should be included when you're looking at your fees. And if you don't and you're working out of your home, when the trusts are working out the costs, is looking at what it costs for a laptop. What does it cost for your stationery? What does it cost to replace your printer cartridges and replace your printers? What is it costing for your internet? And apportioning those things, like you might when you're doing the ATO, because that would be a fair test, is it 20% of your bills that you know are going to what it takes you as a cemetery trust member to undertake your role, particularly if you're doing the secretary role as well. And then if you are looking at you have an employee, is not just looking at their salary, but what it would cost, you know, like on what it costs when you're looking at adding on superannuation and the fees that you would pay for work cover and those sort of things. Contractors, what are their fees? If you've got any special uniforms or anything that you are paying for training and those types of things. The other costs, the insurances, you might have insurances on particular things that are outside the VMIA. I'm not sure what they would be, but you would have to check with VMIA as to what is insurable and what isn't. And then, of course, your memberships and subscriptions are also valid because you actually, you know, are required to keep up with information. So going to sessions like the CCAV or getting training and things like that through subscriptions is really important as well. And then, yes, adding on any bank fees or charges. So there's lots of components to it. That list is not exhaustive, by the way. I mean, that there are so many nuances to different cemeteries and how they operate, but it is just something to start getting you thinking about those sorts of things that you would need to add in. So this is just going to give you an overview of what the fee justification model looks like. So tab 1 on, and we'll put up the justification model later, but tab 1 is designed to be where you put your fee code inputs. So in column number 2, you would put your fee code input into that. It will automatically populate into column number 3. And then column number 4, sorry, and I'm struggling to read that. I should have had a separate one up on my screen. But yeah, column number 4 is where there's a standard descriptor. Thanks, Narelle. And then there's another column where a trust can actually put its own description in. So what I want to say about that is there might be a descriptor, and there is where it sort of says for first burial. So it might, for example, be fee code 601, which is an interment. And it might have first burial. What you can actually do with that in your own descriptor, you might say for subsequent burials as well. Like you might add different descriptors to it. So it doesn't have to just be what is in our fee descriptor that will be the thing that you are determined by. You can put things in that make sense to you, so you actually know what product it is that you're selling. And just bear with me because I'm actually bringing up a fee justification model on my screen so I can read off it. There is a lot in it. So I want to say too, I'm aware this is really difficult sometimes for people to go through. There is a lot to know and there is a lot to consider when you're looking at your fees. But when you are trying to find the fee that you want as well, tab number 4 has that. So where it has the fee code in it. So when you place the fee code that's in there, it will automatically populate and it will tell you what that fee is. So you just need to go to tab number 4 for the actual descriptions of the things that you want to populate. Categories in the fee categories there, fee category 1, 2, and 3 are automatically populated, but that's where the trust description comes in under column or row number, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, when you're filling out the fee justification model. So then when you are looking at your trust costs, this is where you actually start putting in and considering all of those things that we were talking about. So I don't know if you can all see that screen really well, but the first one is a right of interment, bodily remains at need in the lawn grave. So the trust cost, above and beyond what you're actually selling the plot for, the trust costs actually, like when you've worked out your piece of land cost is what I mean for the actual plot. Your trust costs are things like that you need to consider is the amount of time you spend on the phone talking to somebody organising the plot and talking to the grave digger. And this includes from, you know, the funeral director to the grave digger when you're actually purchasing a right of interment. So you might be doing at need burial. So it'll be the grave digger discussions. It'll be the funeral director discussions. It will be going to and from the cemetery to meet a family on site. The time that it takes you to travel to the cemetery to meet someone on site is expected to be included in the time. So when you're selling a right of interment, there are all the sorts of things that you need to consider. If you're just selling it and it's pre-need and you're not doing it at need, well, the gravedigger won't be included in that, like the time that you spend talking to them, but it will still be the funeral director, the family, and whoever else, and also the time that it takes you to submit the paperwork, update your databases, and do the other things that you need to do. So in many occasions, we've found trust members actually really underestimate the time. They might say, oh, that just takes me 2 hours. And when they actually sit down and they really look at the amount of time they've taken, it's often very much more like about 4 or 5 hours that you've spent when you're including your travel time as well. Now, I know you can't be paid for your hourly rate, but what we expect you to do when you're putting in the labour rate is put in the equivalent of a labour rate if somebody was actually being paid to do that task. We do expect you to do your cost recovery for yourselves and the time, you know, your fuel and things like that. But I recently had a look at the ATO's website, and at a base rate, it's about $48 an hour for a casual to do that sort of work. That's the very base rate. So the idea that you might charge someone 50 or you charge yourselves out at $50, $55 an hour is not unreasonable. It would be very unlikely that if you could not do this work and you had to get somebody in to do it, that you would get anybody to do this work for under $50, $55 an hour. So think about those things when you're putting in those costs for the labour rate and the time taken. The material used for selling a right of interment would go to things like the paper, it would go to anything that extra that you've got, like your printer cartridges and things like that. You could use those costs under materials used. Utilities, you would work out your phone, your office costs or your home costs, your electricity and things like that. You'd put in nominal kind of fees towards those sorts of things. That might only be $5, but it's money that we still expect you to recover. And just to be able to justify when, you know, whether you do it on a monthly basis or an annual basis at a trust meeting to list the, you know, amount of time that you've spent working from home, your mobile phone and those sorts of things. And then if you've got an office on site, what does it cost to run that office on an annual basis? And then your miscellaneous will be things like your petrol, your wear and tear on your car, a component of your car insurance, and those sorts of things to cover the miscellaneous costs. If you're looking at maintenance in the cemetery and you're including those in this portion of it, it would be things like, what does it cost you on an annual basis when you're selling a right of interment? What is it on an annual basis for things like weed spray? What is it on an annual basis for maintaining your lawnmowers and things like that, and dividing that amongst the number of plots that you've got for sale? As long as you can justify what it is that you're putting in those columns or under those things, that is fine. And that's the bit about transparency. But we do expect cost recovery on these things. So again, if a lawnmower is costing you $5,000 every 5 years to maintain it and or replace it, or your whippersnippers and things like that, divide those costs amongst the number of plots that you've got for sale and put them under the miscellaneous when you're filling out your columns in those things. So then we would move on to, what we got, column number 3.
Tab 3.
Yeah, table number 3. There's nothing for you to do in this. This just shows you a breakdown of the way that it works it out in the system. There's back-end calculators that I wish I could explain to you, but I cannot because I was not the person that built the spreadsheet. But those back-end calculators just give you an idea of what cost components are going into those things, and a breakdown of them. But again, nothing for you to do anything with. And then again, tab number 4 is just where you will actually find the fee codes that you need. They are an automated breakdown. I just saw a question pop up. I can answer that. Yes, they are an automated breakdown. They all just work in the back end and they calculate the fees afterwards. So there are fees that are essential that trusts should have. And there are a list of those available, I believe, on the next slide, which we will
Go
go
to.
to in a moment. Yep, great, thank
Okay.
you. So these are fees that we've identified in consultation with the CCAV as well, that at a minimum trusts should have: interment for adult bodily remains, interment for cremated remains, interment services, which is your burial, interment services of cremated remains, and an extra fee for oversized graves. And that might be a cost plus model because you might not know what the grave digger is going to charge you. That's getting more into the nuance of things, but they're generally the fees that you should absolutely have as a minimum. There are ways of using these fees where you can do a cost plus 20% for certain fees. I wouldn't recommend that, and that's actually for particularly if you've got a grave digger. That model of and that's for the interment services, and that might be where you don't know what it's actually going to cost, and you don't have a standard cost in your cemetery. You might have a lot of rock and things like that. Your grave digger fees might change, or you might use several contractors and their fees may vary. So rather than having a specified fee where the trust might be at risk of being impacted financially and having to cover costs out of your own money because that fee is not correct, in some circumstances you might be better off having a cost plus model for those things. The other fees that you should consider having at a very minimum standard are your memorialisation permit fees. The department has a list of recommended fees for those things, and they can be found on our website. If you chose to actually use those standard fees instead of looking at your own costs and what those might be, you're not required to actually submit any sort of justification for that. You just put in that the standard fee application and that would be automatically approved. And that's different too. Like, so if you're working out the cost of a right of interment where you're doing what the land calculations are and all the inputs into it, we just need to see what those inputs are, but the predetermined memorial permit fees are not required for you to do that additional work to let us know what they are. They've been based on a standardized sort of average amount of time and things like that it takes to do those things. We actually did a workup of how you might calculate.
Oh, hang on. Need to find the right slide, Jody.
That's okay.
It's out of whack for some reason, and I'm not really sure why.
That's okay. We actually did a workup of how you actually might calculate your land value.
Here you go.
And this is a simplified version of using the land value tool that we've got on our website, because that requires a lot of input, and it's for a more sophisticated model, I would say, of valuing your land. But in terms of valuing and doing a simplified version, you would still need to submit how you've worked it out. But say, for instance, it costs $300,000 for a 500 square metre block. And this is just an example. So it could be an acre. It could be $600,000 for an acre. It doesn't matter. This is just purely an example. You would divide the total cost by the number of squares in there to work out your cost per square metre. So if the average plot size, so in this instance, it's $600 a square metre, that is the land only. That is not the additional costs for the fencing and all of those sorts of things, which we'll go through in a minute. So if you multiplied that by the 4 square metres of a plot, roughly, and it is not the cost of just the little parcel of land, it's around about 4 square metres per plot if you're allowing for distance between them and that type of thing. So you've then got a plot price of $2,400. So then what you would do is that's that fee and that, or that cost component of the total fee. Then you would add in things like looking at the cost of the fence and what it would be to replace that fence. How much would that fence have cost? Because many trusts have actually never been through this exercise. And I've gone through it with a few trusts. So you could actually look at your fence and say, okay, what is it made out of? What would it have cost? And if you work out the actual square metre around the outside, and there's a tool link that it's probably difficult for you to get to this particular website, but there is a tool on the Victorian Government website where what you can do is you can work out the meterage around the outside of the property. But even if you roughly know that, all I've done with trusts is actually looked at it and Googled what it would cost for that type of fencing for that many metres. So as long as you can justify where you got that cost from, so it's the fence, the actual product of the fence, how many fence posts would you need? What would it cost you to put the concrete in the ground as well for those sorts of things? What are the roads within the cemetery? Are they bitumen roads? Are they gravel pathways? But how much would they cost? If you looked at something that was 1 kilometre long, it was 1.5 metres wide and it was 3 inches deep. What would it cost for that gravel to be placed in the cemetery? If you've got a rotunda, what does it cost to build the rotunda? What was the whole structure worth? If you've got a watering system, add all of those things in. If you've planted and put plants in there, how much did those plants cost, including the mulch and including all the topsoil and those types of things? All of those things get added up together and they get divided by the number of plots that you've got left to sell. They get added to the total land cost. And then if you've got a new development as well that you're building in the cemetery, and even if it's an existing development and you're looking out for those things, it's what did it cost when you're looking at adding them into the land value? What did it cost for the pathways between those? What did it cost you for the lawn beams? What did it cost you for the concrete things that you might sit things on? If you've got prefabbed monumental areas, what did it cost you for those in those particular areas? You add those things up and you add them to the other costs that you've got. And again, it gets divided by the number of plots that you've got in a cemetery. And then when you're looking at perpetual maintenance, when you're selling a plot, you can either go by, in the fee justification model, it has a nominated $2 perpetual maintenance. That calculates out, but what we would like to also see trusts do is many don't actually consider perpetual maintenance and in the long term and thinking about what it's costing the community right now. But cemeteries are there in perpetuity. And so you've got an obligation to look at your perpetual maintenance and setting money aside, not just for the people that are running the cemetery now, but for future people that are running them. Because if that money is not set aside appropriately, and while you're actually being able to do the works now yourselves and as volunteers, and we very much appreciate that, many communities are now struggling to get volunteers in and people need to be paid to do these things. And there is no money to pay them to do it if there is no perpetual maintenance set aside for it. And so what happens is the cemeteries become very run down and there is no future money for them at all. And there is basically almost going to be nobody to look after burials in the future in some of those cemeteries either, because people can't do it or manage it. So it really needs to have consideration to what those costs are and maintaining it into the future. So when you're working out what it costs you on an annual basis, you might want to look at all of the things like what does it cost for your mowing, your whippersnippering, the petrol, the maintenance for all of those? What does it cost on an annual basis for your water, your power if you've got a building or rotunda that's powered and things like that? What's it costing you on an annual basis for your mulch, topping up your pathways, doing any fence maintenance? and those sorts of things. And you could divide those total costs by the number of plots in the cemetery, and you could put that in the perpetual maintenance section of the fee justification model. You just need to say what those inputs are instead of just using the standard $2. Now, that would only apply to the sale of an actual plot. The notional $2 that's in there would apply to things like where, because you can actually add perpetual maintenance to most of your fees. The standard $2 would apply to things like memorialisation permit fee and your administration fees and that type of thing. But when you're selling an actual plot, it would be worth looking at all of those things and working out your perpetual maintenance cost. The model has some sort of calculation in it where it will calculate those over the 100 years. And then it adds it to the total fee for the plot for the cemetery. And in some instances, I really do think that, or most instances, I think it's worth you doing that. But you can work with the models and have a look at it. And it is a lot to work out, but again, it doesn't have to be an absolute. It can be on average, what do you spend? You know, how much does it cost you to, you know, fill up the mower and things like that. And again, those things are worth looking at in terms of you actually being able to recoup your own costs as well. And we do genuinely expect you to do that. I know there's very many good-hearted volunteers out there that say, oh, we don't need it, we don't want it, we do it for the good of the community. But nobody expects you to be out of pocket other than the time that it takes you to do something, which obviously, unfortunately, you can't be paid for as a volunteer, but the other things you definitely can be paid for. The next slide.
Is this the one you want?
Yeah, and so this one again just sort of talks about looking at how you do your land calculation. There is a website that gives you valuations and things like that. So when you're working out your land value, you can either look at that website or you can actually just do a desktop review of local property sales in your area to work out a land value, as long as you've actually just put down where you've got that land value from. And I strongly suggest you don't look at farm land, and that you're looking more at a residential or rural residential, depending on where you are. Some will definitely be residential, some might be rural residential, but the idea of looking at farmland would indicate that the land that you've got is regenerative, and it's not. You don't get to shift cows from one paddock to another while the grass grows and you're adjusting cattle for somebody else and they're paying you money for that. Once that land is gone and it is used for a plot for somebody to be interred in, it is gone. You don't get to do anything else with that land to generate new income. So I recommend you look at either residential or rural residential, and many rural areas now are surrounded by residential plots. Our land is farmland from real estate. I didn't, sorry, I was trying to answer that question as I saw it pop up, but I'm happy to talk to you, and so is Narelle, but just generally, that is where as well. If you have got large land and you're mostly surrounded by farmland, I would still look at rural residential. That's fine to look at that. I mean, as I said, it's not farmland. And what will help actually increase the prices of your plots for sale is if you properly look at the perpetual maintenance and what it costs you. But by the time you add in all the fences and those sorts of things, it will generally generate a closer to value for an internment for eternity than what it will if you just look at the actual land value, because you've added in all of the things around perpetual maintenance and considered all of the things that it costs you. Because many people don't think about all of the additional things that go into managing and maintaining a cemetery. And like I said, even the time that you spend doing it, you know, even to meet a gravedigger, you might go to the cemetery for an internment. You might go to the cemetery 4 times.
Yep.
You know, and you might be on site for nearly 4 hours for the burial. So
Mhm.
all of a sudden, an internment might be looking like it takes you 8 hours, not the 2 hours that somebody says, oh yeah, I just did this. You know, in real time, it might all up be something like 8 hours. So just have a really good think about those things and don't undersell the time that you take or the services that you provide. And I know there is a level of community expectation when you're setting the fees as well, but that is not the only thing. You know, you are not there to provide a service for nothing. You are not there to inter people for nothing. And it costs a lot to maintain a cemetery in perpetuity. So it needs to be balanced with realistically providing your own cost recovery, perpetual maintenance of the cemetery, and those sorts of things, and the development costs. Like, what does it cost to do all of that? So I think that those are probably the main points that I want to go through. Narelle, do we want to try and answer some questions if people have got
If you're
questions?
happy to do that, absolutely. Or do
Go on.
you want to see if we can manage to do a justification model?
Sure, if you can bring one up, would people like to do that? Would you like to go through one in real time just to have a look at it?
Just bear
Yes,
with me on the technicalities of this one, okay?
Sure.
I've got no picture.
So I'm going to stop sharing the screen I've got and I'm going to try and get a justification model that Jody can play with. So just please bear with me here. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if I can type in it. Oh, yes, I can. So, Jody, you may have to tell me what you want.
Sure. Okay, so
unless you can try and see if you can type in it because you have. No.
No, my cursor's not going anywhere in there. So
okay, cool. All right.
So if you wanted to put in, well, let's work with a right of internment, an actual right of internment. So where am I? Fee descriptor list.
Oh, so a 601?
601, yeah. All right. And so in your trust description here, right of interment at need, this might in your trust description read, because you might sell triple depth plots, but you might sell single plots as well. So in this descriptor, if you've got a triple depth plot that's worth more, you might want to indicate here that this is for single plots only, and then you might have a second row that says 601 interment at need triple plot. So you might have then, you've got two separate fees set up for those sorts of things. You also might decide that on that fee code 601 at the top where it's a single plot, you might say first and second, you know, like single and double plots, that's the price. And then the other one might have, you know, a third plot as well. Because all cemeteries might be different too. You might have areas in the cemetery where you can only sell single plots depending on the soil type and the dirt and rock and things like that. Or you know, might be able to have all triple plots and therefore that's how you sell it and there's an increased cost on those.
So we might say that this is a lawn only.
Yes, and true, yeah, because you might have monumental areas that have got different costs and things like that. And then this is where the trust descriptor comes in. So is it lawn? Is it monumental? Is it both? Is it, you know, generally and so you might find those prices vary in those categories.
Okay.
If, for instance, you've got it could be a brand new fee. If it's brand new fee, just type in new because then we know there's nothing else there. If it's an existing fee, you might type in you might type in the price that you've already got. So say, for instance, in that one, yep, great, thanks, Norelle.
I'm guessing.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, this is just an exercise to just show you how it all works if you've not been through it. So then your land value is where you'll calculate that. So this might be that you've now looked at your land value and you've got, so we'll go with the one where it's at need triple interment, then Norelle first. And then you've indicated that your actual land value is now $3,000. Because you've not looked at it for a very long time. You've done a couple of things in the area to improve it, or costs have gone up for land generally, and you've now revalued those things. So that's the code for that. And let's go for the new one. Let's put in that you've looked at that, and all up, the land value for the new plot is $2,500. That's just the land. Yet the land value is the plot. That is the pieces of work that we went through just before, where you'll calculate the actual land value, and then you will calculate the things like the fence, the rotunda, the driveways, the pathways, all of those things that go into that, and then add that into the land value for the actual plot. So that will include all of those types of things. Then to calculate the trust costs, you need to go to tab 2. Now, this is where you fill that in the back end. So for the first one, again, let's say that you've spent roughly, you're selling a plot at need lawn, so you're putting yourself down as $50, $55 an hour. That's a rate that is reasonable to pay somebody to do this sort of work. And that by the time you have taken the phone call, made the time to go and see somebody, you've actually gone out to the cemetery to meet them on site, you've gone back home. It might take you half an hour to go to the cemetery and half an hour to drive home. That's already 1 hour of your time. You might have spent an hour and a half with somebody as well. So you might have spent, by the time you've done the paperwork all up, 4 hours helping somebody to purchase a plot. So then what you would do is you would look at any materials used. So maybe your paper and a nominal fee, like for your like your paper, you've got envelopes, you've got those sorts of things. You might add in and stamps and postage. Well, it would be reasonable to put in $1.50 to $2 just for those costs. I'm not sure what a stamp is these days if you're sending something out to somebody, but if that's the way that you, sorry?
$1.50.
Oh, well, so then you'd put in at least $3 there. By the time you got, well, your envelope, you've got to purchase your envelope as well. And then utilities used, that would be things like your mobile phone, if you've got an office that you're using at home to do all that sort of thing. So you might put in, I don't know, $4 there. You've got to look at, the heating and the cooling in your house and things like that you use in your office space as well. And then under miscellaneous, you would look at things like your car insurance, your wear and tear on your car, your petrol, and those types of things for the interment of bodily remains. You might also, in this category, look at things like, this could be where, and this is where it depends on what you want to do. This could be where you might consider, for the sale of a plot, on top of your own actual costs, under miscellaneous, you could put things like the replacement lawnmower and that type of thing in this section here. Sorry, is there something I need to clarify? No? Okay. So you in the miscellaneous, this is where you can either just use your own costs and worry about putting in the perpetual maintenance under the perpetual maintenance column, or you can include things probably for more simplified cemetery trust operations where you don't have a lot of maintenance. You might put all of the costs in there. But say, for instance, we're just doing in this section, all you're doing under miscellaneous is looking at your costs for your fuel and wear and tear on your car and things like that. So you might put $20 in there. And then if you then go back down into the fee justification model, it will have your costs calculated there. This is purely just for the sale of a plot. And now you're selling a plot. If you look at it at the end price, that's 3,251. That's without you adding in any additional perpetual maintenance. But in the perpetual maintenance column, as we spoke about before, if you actually added in all of the sorts of costs that we talked about to manage and maintain a cemetery, then say for instance, on average, you work out per grave, it's $15 a year to manage that grave. By the time you've calculated it out over 3,000 plots, one plot costs you $15 a year for perpetual maintenance. If you add that into the perpetual maintenance column, so that's on 601 line 1, Narelle.
Yeah. So 15.
You add $15 into that. Yep. That's now your plot value, and it's $3,843 for a plot, because you've taken into account all of the things that it takes or have gone into the value of that land, including all of the things that we talked about. CPI increase just gets added to the initial plots,
Yeah,
like the initial fees.
That was answering a question that came up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so CPI is just added. That is not intended to override trusts looking at their own fees. It just gets added on an annual basis to the existing fees that are there. And so I hope that makes sense, but that's how you'd basically work out your costs. So, and again, the new interment, the interment triple at need, you would work out those sorts of things, and those costs would be roughly the same. You'd add in your $15 for perpetual maintenance, as long as I said you can explain what that is, and it just needs to be a simple explanation, and then your trust costs would probably be the same for that. It would be no different to the money that we worked out earlier. It wouldn't cost you any more to do that, but the actual land value of a triple plot might be more as well. You might have to do a pre-dig into the soil or do some extra work around it to allow a triple depth plot. So that would be how you would do those fees. When you are actually calculating the fees for interment services, which I think is 301, is it?
304.
304.
Yep.
So what you would do there, and this is where it says first interment is automatically calculated. You might have in your trust scripture, it is first and subsequent interments. It might not just be for the first one. That cost might cover all of them, or it might not. It depends. But that's an opportunity for a trust to determine what its fees will be. Do you need a separate fee for something, or don't you? And say, for instance, your gravedigger currently charges you $1,000 and you've got, I don't know, $150 in trust fees. So your existing fee for interment services might be, say, $1,500 all up. So you're not going to have land value in this because this is for the interment. This is not anything extra. And say, for instance, you've gone with a new contractor. So if you've got, so you'll put in your trust costs that you'll work out in that back end there, your trust costs for your interment. And this might be, you'd be looking again at $50, $55 an hour. You'd be looking at how long it takes you. So this is the actual interment itself. So this is where you need to think about, you've spoken with the family or you've spoken with the funeral director probably. You've also organised the gravedigger. You've also got the actual interment services themselves. So this would be where you would say, okay, how long has this actually taken me? Because you're also on site at the cemetery, potentially anywhere up to 4 hours before and after the funeral. You might have gone to the cemetery several times. So, and spent half an hour each time at the cemetery. So that might be an hour, 1.5 hours of your time. Then it's taken you another hour to drive to and from the cemetery. So you're now looking at 1.5 hours for just the setup, like meeting the funeral director there, meeting the grave digger there, you traveling there. So now you're at 2.5 hours that you've spent, plus you might have another 4 hours at the cemetery. It's taken you then 6.5 hours for an actual internment of bodily remains all up. They're the sorts of things that you should be thinking about when you do that. So then you've also got materials used, because now you're updating your records and things like that. You're providing a certificate of internment to somebody. You're doing all of those sorts of things. Those costs remain the same. Miscellaneous in this instance, you might have a $30 or $40 cost because you've actually travelled to the cemetery more frequently than you would have ordinarily. And then when you go back to tab 1 on the fee justification model, that has now populated those sorts of costs, but then you've also now got your contractor costs. So if your grave digger is charging you $1,200 to dig a plot, that is now your fee for your interment services. You would leave the perpetual maintenance as the minimum rate because you can apply perpetual maintenance to all fees, but this is just minimal, so you're actually not double dipping. What you're doing when you're selling a plot is you're looking at the total cost to look after that plot all year round, and then you're just adding a nominal couple of dollars perpetual maintenance to your fees, which you're entitled to do for your other services. And then that gives you your total fee for the internment. So that's just a rough overview of how the fee justification model works. And there's back-end calculators in there that increase those costs. And as I said, it takes into account certain things like overheads and that type of thing to generate those costs that you've got. No, that doesn't include the plot for interment services. An interment service is the actual burial itself. The right of interment is 601, and that's the purchase of the plot. If you had an at-need burial, then the person would be paying, say, you've got 601, the top fee, which is $3,843, plus they'd be paying the $1,934 for the internment. So it'd be a combination of both of those fees, just not one. So the right of interment. So if both things happened at the same time, then that would be the cost that they would pay. That and probably just on that, as I'm looking at that, see where it says at need, the first one, right of interment at need. You could have a separate one for pre-need as well. Sometimes cemeteries do that. What they do is they make the pre-needs a higher cost than the at-needs, just because you've got, you know, there's the risk that the land and the cost and all of that goes up over time, and that you're not really cost recovering when somebody's interred. But what you could do with that at need, you could just say at and pre-need as well in the trust descriptor. You could just have a standard cost.
Cemetery, this is Leanne.
Sorry?
No,
Good.
it's somebody.
How are you?
Leanne, mute yourself, please.
I thought I had to hang on. Sorry. I thought I had.
Sorry, I thought that was a question. Yeah, so you could do that. You don't have to have a at need and pre-need, but you could also have those separate fees.
Sorry, I'm in a hotline meeting.
Hang on, I will mute her.
Thank you, Brel.
Well, you are, so I don't know what you're doing.
I know. I know.
I
no,
saw a question
twice.
pop.
She's in twice. There we go. Let's try that. Okay, sorry, Jody, all fixed.
Narelle, you've muted Jody.
Oh, have I? Oh, lucky me. Bear with me a sec. I didn't mean to mute.
So I've
Jody.
unmuted myself.
Thank you.
I just saw a question pop up. Well, you've got a monumental section that's completely full. If you've got, so you would not include that in the land value for the plots that you've got left for sale either. And when you're calculating the land value of the remaining plots, don't include the existing plots that are there that are already full and gone. You're looking at the remaining plots that are there. So it's of the number of plots that you've got left to sell. And in your monumental section, the only thing I'd say there is if you've got interment services, which you might have because you've got to lift the ledger and do those sorts of things, think very carefully about those fees because often they might be a hand dig and you might want to look at a cost plus model for those with your grave digger because they could cost a lot of money to hand dig those out. So think about those sorts of fees when you're doing them and really what the costs are. Often trusts underestimate those costs and then they end up wearing them and you don't have the money to do that sort of thing. So really work out whether or not you've got a cost plus model or not. What I would want to say with the cost plus model as well is if you're charging a cost plus model, generally you are only taking the 20% then for all of your sorts of costs. So sometimes you might be better off just going and saying, all right, interment services contractor fee only cost. You don't know what that is. And you might be better off having a separate admin interment fee for those when you're working out your costs. So instead of like so where you'd have a 304 interment service fee, and that might be monumental section hand dig only, you might just say contractor costs does not include trust administration. So in that descriptor there, Narelle, you might have say contractor costs and then does not include trust administration, and you might set aside a separate trust administration fee for that where you don't know how long it's going to take. Because you might not cost recover, that's all, otherwise. So that's just something to think about when you're doing it. And you might then just have a separate, admin interment, which is where you would put all of the hours that it takes you, and that includes the time that you might go and spend going backwards and forwards to the cemetery. But you might not be there for 4 hours because you've left the grave digger behind and he's doing the hand dig and things like that. You might not be there for that long while he's doing that, but you certainly might be there for the service and afterwards, and you might have spent a couple of hours going to and from the cemetery later to make sure it's all been, backfilled properly and the concrete ledger's been put back on and those sorts of things. So where you're doing those sorts of things and you're adding in your admin costs, think about those sorts of things as well. You'll have maybe a cost for a ledger removal that might be separate again because you need a stonemason, not the grave digger. So all of those things need to be considered and those separate cost components when you're adding in your fees. So you might end up, say for instance, where it's an interment. So somebody's they've already purchased the plot because it's a monumental section, and then you've got the hand dig, and so you've got the 304 code, and then you might have an actual admin fee that you charge on that. So you'll be charging 2 separate fee codes for those things. The same as you would if you had an at-need right of interment and then you're paying for the interment services. So you'd have fee code 301 and 304 added together when you're charging somebody. We're at time. One other thing I'd like to just mention so that we're not, that's not in here is there's a number of trusts that have reached out recently that have said funeral directors owe them money because they've held a funeral and they're still waiting for the funeral director to pay them. My suggestion is that you get payment 72 hours in advance of the funeral and make that a policy so that it is paid and it is squared away. If a funeral director has not paid you and they've had 2 or 3 interments, I would suggest that you don't allow any further interments until those monies have been paid. The funeral directors are paid prior to a funeral occurring. They have your money. You trying to recover money from them later in a timely fashion is often very difficult. And you don't have the resources to do it, you know, to chase them up and keep doing it. You're not a massive operation. You don't have external people or legal people that can write them letters and do all of that thing. And I strongly suggest that you make sure that you have got the money beforehand and it is in the bank account of the cemetery trust before you allow an interment to occur. That will save you a lot of heartache in chasing up funeral directors that are not paying. And there is nothing wrong with a trust having a policy to say that these funds need to be provided and cleared within 74 hours or 72 hours of a funeral occurring. I will answer the rest of those questions, but just on the plaque, work out how long it takes you. It's fine. If you have multiple telephone conversations, work out how long it roughly takes you and average that out and add those into your trust costs or your time so that it gets built into your trust costs.
Same
Don't
with you.
underestimate the time that you spend doing things.
The same with your monumental permit application fee. You still need to do the inspections of that monument before, after, and mark it out. All of those times that you go to the cemetery are still vitally important
True.
to be
So-
added into that cost.
I will undertake with Narelle to answer those questions that you've put in the chat so that Narelle can pop them up on a site for you. And I'm going to stop talking now and hand back to Narelle. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody. It's been a fantastic session. I'm sure everybody going to have at least one thing to take away from today. We really appreciate. I hope everybody realises the department and the association, we're working really hard together to make life somewhat easier for everybody. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for your time. And this will be up on the website maybe by the end of next week. I'm not working at my desk, so it's a bit more challenging this week. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. And after funeral.